The first thing everyone noticed was the laugh. It wasn't loud or angry. It wasn't cruel. It was calm, slow, and completely unexpected. In a glass boardroom high above downtown Chicago, where careers were built and destroyed with quiet words, Daniel Reed laughed right after his sister fired him. For a moment, no one moved. The board members stared at him, unsure if they had heard correctly. His sister, Olivia Reed, stood at the head of the table, perfectly dressed, perfectly controlled, and newly crowned CEO of Reed & Co. This was her first official meeting in power. She had rehearsed this moment. What she had not prepared for was her older brother's reaction. "Is something funny, Daniel?" Olivia asked, her voice steady but tight. Daniel met her eyes, smiled softly, and shook his head. "No," he said, "just unexpected." That laugh stayed in the room even after he picked up his coat and walked out, and no one there understood what it truly meant. Reed & Co. was more than a company. It was a family name carved into the skyline of Chicago. Their grandfather had started it with one small warehouse. Their father turned it into a respected national brand. And Daniel had spent the last 10 years keeping it alive through quiet discipline and long nights. He never wanted attention. He never wanted the spotlight. While others chased titles, Daniel chose responsibility. He solved problems before they exploded. He protected the company from risks no one else saw. He believed loyalty mattered more than recognition. Olivia believed in something else. She believed in vision, power, and speed. She left home early, studied in New York, and returned with sharp ideas and fearless confidence. Investors admired her. The board trusted her. To them, Olivia represented the future. To Daniel, she was still his little sister. Brilliant but impatient, determined to prove she didn't need anyone's help. Their rivalry had never been loud. It lived in pauses, in looks, in words left unsaid at family dinners. Olivia thought Daniel underestimated her. Daniel thought Olivia misunderstood the cost of leadership. When their father announced his retirement and named Olivia CEO, Daniel didn't object. He stood beside her, clapped, and promised support. But something inside him shifted. For the first time, he felt invisible in the company he helped protect. The firing happened fast. Olivia didn't raise her voice. She didn't show emotion. She followed advice from consultants who said strong leaders must make bold cuts early. Daniel's role, they claimed, no longer fit the future structure. "Your position is being dissolved," Olivia said, looking directly at him. "This decision is final." The words were clean and professional, but Daniel heard the deeper meaning. This wasn't about structure. This was about control. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply nodded. That was when he laughed. Not because it didn't hurt, but because he had already let go. As the elevator carried him down, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't read. Outside, the city moved on like nothing had happened. Cars honked. People rushed. Life continued. For the first time in a decade, Daniel had nowhere to be. He walked aimlessly, hands in his pockets, memories flooding in. Late nights at the office, missed birthdays. A woman who once waited for him to choose her. Emily Carter. He hadn't thought about her in a long time. But that day her name felt close. Emily was warmth and honesty in a life full of pressure. They met at a company charity event years ago. She wasn't impressed by his last name. She liked his quiet humor, his kindness, the way he listened. They loved each other deeply. But love wasn't enough. Daniel always said, "Just a little more time." Emily eventually stopped waiting. Their goodbye was gentle but painful. No anger, no blame. Just two people walking away with full hearts and empty hands. As Daniel stood near the river, watching the water move forward without hesitation, he wondered if losing his job was the price of finally moving on. Back in the boardroom, Olivia sat alone after everyone left. The excitement she expected never arrived. Instead, there was silence. Her reflection stared back at her through the glass walls. She told herself she had done the right thing. Leaders had to be tough. Family couldn't interfere with business. Still, something about Daniel's laugh stayed with her. It wasn't the sound of defeat. It sounded like freedom. She pushed the thought away and focused on numbers, charts, and plans. The future was hers now. Or so she believed. Daniel, meanwhile, walked into a small cafe to escape the cold. He ordered coffee, sat by the window, and breathed. The world felt open and uncertain. Scary, but honest. He didn't know it yet, but the choice Olivia made that morning would change all of their lives. The company, the family, the love he thought he had lost forever. And that laugh. It was only the beginning. The first time Olivia Reed realized she might have made a mistake. It was 2 a.m., and the office was empty except for the hum of computers. She had expected victory, the thrill of control. Finally running the company she had worked so hard to earn, but all she felt was tension. Charts on the screen, emails piling up, phone calls unanswered, and delays she hadn't predicted. Reed & Co., the empire built by her family, suddenly felt fragile in ways she didn't understand. Daniel had been gone for 3 weeks, and the absence was more than noticeable. The operations he had managed flawlessly now wobbled. Shipments were late. Suppliers were frustrated. Minor crises that he would have fixed without a second thought became boardroom headaches for Olivia. She had thought firing him would prove her authority, but it only exposed her own inexperience. Meanwhile, Daniel was thriving in ways Olivia couldn't see. He moved into a small apartment near Lake Michigan, surrounded by the quiet he hadn't allowed himself in years. Mornings began with running along the lakefront, the cold wind clearing his thoughts. Evenings were spent reading or walking through the city. Noticing details he had ignored when consumed by Reed & Co., he had expected grief, maybe even regret over leaving the family business. But instead he felt relief. He realized he had spent too long living someone else's expectations. One evening, Danu wandered into a small bookstore cafe, seeking warmth and a quiet cup of coffee. That was when he saw her Emily Carter. Time had softened her face, but her eyes carried the same spark that had captivated him years ago. The air shifted between them. Words that had been unsaid for so long suddenly hung in the space between two people who had once loved fully and left too soon. Emily's smile was tentative at first. "Daniel," she said softly. The single word carried the weight of years. He returned the smile, though it was bittersweet, because he knew the reunion was unexpected. She had a life of her own now, and so did he. But some things, he realized, didn't need planning. Some things simply waited to be noticed. They talked quietly, sitting side by side in the warm glow of the cafe lights. Daniel explained the truth that had stayed hidden. He hadn't been fired because he failed. He had planned his departure long before Olivia became CEO. The deal he had worked on months prior on acquisition and restructuring plan was already in place. It was designed to protect the company from future risks, and his part was complete. That quiet, controlled laughter at the boardroom meeting had not been mockery or humiliation, had been relief. The kind that comes when someone finally steps out from a life that wasn't fully theirs. Emily listened, astonished. She had assumed the worst, that he had been forced out, humiliated, or upset. Instead, she found a man who had mastered letting go, who had chosen freedom over comfort, love over obligation. The weight of years seemed to lift in that small space, replaced by a tender understanding. Back at Reed & Co., Olivia began noticing the cracks Daniel had predicted. Contracts were delayed. Projects lagged. Her staff was anxious, and investors were subtly restless. She pored over reports late into the night, trying to solve every problem Daniel had once fixed before breakfast. Then she stumbled upon his notes-detailed documents outlining strategies she hadn't considered. Precautions for deals, plans for employee retention, and crisis management measures. Everything Daniel had done was still quietly keeping the company afloat for the first time. Olivia felt something unfamiliar. Humility. She realized that authority and ambition weren't enough to sustain leadership. Foresight, patience, and experience mattered just as much. She also realized how much she had underestimated Daniel, not just as an employee, but as a brother, as someone who had silently carried the weight of the family's legacy. She called him. Her voice, when he answered, was uncharacteristically soft. "Daniel, can we meet?" When they did, the conversation wasn't about job titles or authority. It was about family, choices, and understanding. Olivia admitted she had acted hastily, and Daniel listened without anger. There were no apologies that could erase the past, no words that could fully undo years of unspoken tension. But there was acknowledgement, and for the first time in a long while, something fragile began to heal. Daniel declined returning to the company. He had something more important, now: freedom, peace, and a chance to rebuild his life on his own terms. But he left Olivia with knowledge, guidance, and respect, quietly empowering her without ever stepping back into the boardroom. She had learned a lesson only experience could teach, that leadership wasn't about asserting power. It was about understanding consequences, protecting what mattered, and listening to the wisdom of those who had come before. That evening, Daniel and Emily walked along the lake. The city lights shimmered on the water, casting reflections like scattered memories. He felt a lightness he hadn't known since his early 20s, a mix of relief and hope. Emily's hand brushed against his, tentative but familiar, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future not dictated by duty or legacy, but by choice. "I missed this," Emily admitted, glancing at him with a mixture of nostalgia and warmth. "So did I," Daniel replied, his voice quiet but certain. "Maybe losing everything was the only way I could find what I really wanted." They walked together in comfortable silence, letting the world move around them without pressure or urgency. Daniel laughed softly, the kind of laughter that comes after sorrow, after responsibility, after sacrifice, free and unburdened. Emily laughed with him, a sound that fit naturally into the rhythm of his new life. For Daniel, being fired had not been a tragedy. It had been liberation. And for Olivia, losing her brother to a quiet, intentional departure was both a lesson and a challenge, proof that leadership required more than ambition. It required humility and recognition of the unseen work of those who carried the weight quietly. The story of Reed and Co., of Daniel and Olivia, of Emily and the possibilities of second chances was far from over. But in that moment, under the glow of the Chicago skyline, with the gentle waves of Lake Michigan lapping at the shore, Daniel knew one truth clearly: endings are only painful if you cling to them. Let go, and the next chapter begins with freedom, laughter, and perhaps even love. Sometimes being fired isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of the life you were always meant to live. And Daniel had just started.